The ferry cut through the grey waters of the fjord, its diesel engine thrumming a steady rhythm that Ben Carter, a 25-year-old photographer with perpetually tousled hair and a camera that seemed permanently attached to his hand, felt in his chest. He stood at the railing, capturing the dramatic cliffs that rose on either side like ancient sentinels, hoping to add a career-making shot of the Aurora Borealis to his portfolio. The late September air was crisp, carrying the salt tang of the sea and the faint scent of pine from the forested slopes above. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Chloe Miller, the youngest of the group at 23, appeared beside him, her bright, curious eyes taking in everything. She had organized this trip as a post-graduation adventure, a final taste of freedom before starting her career, and her enthusiasm was infectious. Ben lowered his camera and smiled at her. "It's stunning. The light here is incredible. That golden hour is going to be perfect for the aurora shots tonight." Behind them, Jessica "Jess" Davis, a 29-year-old travel blogger dressed in stylish, brightly colored outdoor gear, was already filming a selfie video for her 500,000 followers. "Hey guys, just arriving in the most amazing little Norwegian town. The scenery is absolutely epic. Can't wait to show you the aurora. Don't forget to like and subscribe." David Chen, a 38-year-old software engineer from San Francisco, who had the weary look of a man escaping a stressful job, looked up from his tablet with a faint, tired smile. "She never stops, does she?" "It's her job," Chloe said quietly. "She has 500,000 followers. That's got to be a lot of pressure to produce content constantly." Dr. Michael Grant, a professor of Scandinavian folklore in his mid-40s, joined them at the railing, his tweed jacket and thoughtful expression marking him as an academic. He had joined the tour specifically to research the area's local legends. "I must admit, this is even more remote than I anticipated." "You really think you'll find something for your research here, Professor?" Ben asked. "Oh, I'm sure of it," Grant said, his eyes gleaming. "These isolated communities are treasure troves of folklore, stories that have been passed down for generations, untouched by the modern world." The ferry rounded a final bend in the fjord, and the town of Kråkvik came into view. It was a cluster of colorful wooden buildings, reds, yellows, and whites, clinging to the rocky shore. Fishing boats bobbed in the small harbor, and beyond them, wooden drying racks stood like skeletal fingers against the gray sky, hung with cod splitting in the cold air. As they disembarked, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He turned, scanning the handful of locals who'd gathered at the dock, but they were all occupied with their own business, unloading crates, mending nets, and talking in low voices. Still, the feeling persisted. Their hotel, the Sjohus Inn, was a converted warehouse overlooking the harbor. The owner, a taciturn woman named Fru Nielsen, checked them in with minimal conversation and handed over 3 room keys. Chloe and Jess would share a room, Ben and David another, and Dr. Grant had a single. "The town tour begins at 4, Fru Nielsen said in heavily accented English. "Dinner with the group is at 7. Tomorrow you have the outskirts tour in the morning. The buses to the lighthouse leave tomorrow night at 8, before the tide comes in." "Buses?" Jess asked. "Plural?" "There are 32 people signed up for the aurora viewing," Fru Nielsen explained. 4 buses. You are in the first group." After settling into their rooms, the group reconvened in the hotel lobby. They had 3 hours before the town tour began, and Chloe was eager to explore. Kråkvik was a working fishing village, not a tourist destination. The streets were narrow and uneven, the buildings weathered by salt and wind. A small grocery store, a post office, a church with a distinctive steeple, and 3 pubs made up the town's amenities. But there was a stark beauty to it, a sense of timelessness that Ben found compelling. They wandered down to the harbor, where the fishing boats creaked against their moorings. The smell of fish was inescapable. Gulls swooped in and fought over scraps, their cries echoing off the water. An old man sat on an overturned crate near the end of the pier, mending a net with gnarled, weathered hands. He was ancient, his face a map of wrinkles, his eyes pale blue and rheumy. He wore a thick wool sweater and rubber boots, and a pipe jutted from the corner of his mouth. As they approached, he looked up and fixed his eyes on Chloe. "Excuse me," Chloe said politely. "We're visiting for the Aurora viewing at the lighthouse." The old man's hands stilled. His English was broken, heavily accented. "Storholmen?" "Yes," Chloe said. "Is something wrong?" The old man stood abruptly, his movements surprisingly quick for someone his age. He stepped closer. "No go," the old man said urgently. He grabbed Chloe's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "No, go Storholmen is bad place. Farlig." Stepping to her side, Ben firmly said, "Sir, please let go of her." The old man slowly released his grip on her, but didn't step back. His pale eyes were wide, almost wild. "The drunket," he said. "People go. People no come back. Vanet takes them." "What drownings?" Dr. Grant asked, suddenly interested. He pulled out a small notebook. The old man's gaze darted to Dr. Grant, then back to Chloe. He seemed to be struggling with the English words. The musique. You hear musique, you no listen. You hear musique, you run. He gestured frantically, searching for the word. Is not ekta. Is him. Him? Jess prompted gently. Våtmannen, the old man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He made a gesture, running his hands down his face and body, as if indicating water dripping. He play the Hardingfella. He mimed playing a stringed instrument. "A Hardanger fiddle?" Dr. Grant translated. "Ya, ya," the old man nodded vigorously. "Gillen Hardingfella. He play, you listen, you drunk it. Many people." David laughed uncomfortably. "Sounds like an urban legend." The old man's expression hardened. "Is not mita, is real. I see him. 50 år ago, I see him. My bror," his voice broke. "My bror hear the musique. He walk into the sea. I try to stop him, but," he shook his head, "he no hear me. He only hear musique. He drunk it." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The old man's pain was palpable, whether his story was true or not. "I'm very sorry about your bror," Chloe said softly. The old man grasped her hand in his gently. "Please, no go Storholmen, is bad place. Våtmannen, he yacht her there." "Olav!" A sharp voice cut through the air. A younger man strode down the pier toward them. He spoke rapidly in Norwegian to the old man, his tone scolding. The old man argued back, gesturing at the group, but the younger man took his arm and began leading him away. "I apologize," the younger man said in perfect English. "My father, he has dementia. He tells these stories to tourists. Please don't take it seriously." "He seemed very sincere," Dr. Grant said. The younger man's expression was tight. "He believes what he says. but it's not real. There are no mysterious drownings. There have been accidents over the years, yes, this is a fishing village, and people drown. But there's no monster. He forced a smile. Enjoy your visit to Kråkvik. The Aurora is beautiful. You'll love it. He led the old man away, still speaking in low, urgent Norwegian. The old man looked back, his pale eyes finding Chloe's, and mouthed something she couldn't quite make out. "Well," David said after a moment, "that was unsettling." "Poor man," Jess said, "losing a brother like that. It's no wonder he's traumatized." "But the specificity," Dr. Grant murmured, scribbling in his notebook. "The wet man, the golden fiddle, the music. These are classic elements of Scandinavian water spirit folklore. The nokken, specifically." "The what?" Ben asked. "Nukken, a Norwegian water spirit, male, shape-shifting, plays enchanted music to lure victims to drown. There are hundreds of stories about them throughout Scandinavia." Grant's eyes gleamed with academic interest. "I wonder if there's a local variant of the legend here." "You're not seriously considering this," David said. "Of course, not as a literal truth," Grant replied, "but folklore often has roots in real events. Perhaps there were drownings near the lighthouse, and the locals created a legend to explain them. It's fascinating, really." Though the afternoon wasn't particularly cold, a shiver ran down Chloe's spine. "Let's head back. The tour starts soon." The town tour was led by a cheerful young woman named Signy, who spoke excellent English and seemed determined to present Kråkvik in the best possible light. She showed them the church, the fish processing plant, and the small museum dedicated to the town's fishing heritage. She mentioned nothing about drownings or water spirits. At 7, they gathered with the other tourists, a mix of nationalities, mostly couples and small groups, in the dining room of the Sjohus Inn. The meal was traditional Norwegian fare: fish soup, roasted cod, boiled potatoes, and lingonberry sauce. The food was simple but delicious. As they ate, Jess couldn't resist telling the story of the old fisherman for her blog, narrating into her phone. So, this ancient guy grabs Chloe's arm and starts going on about a wet man who plays a golden fiddle and drowns people. Proper horror movie stuff, right? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Several people at nearby tables turned to listen. Chloe wished Jess would be more discreet. "A wet man?" one of the other tourists asked, an American woman in her 50s. "Is that a cryptid?" "More like a water spirit," Dr. Grant explained. "The nukken, from Norwegian folklore. They're said to—" "More wine?" A waiter appeared at their table with almost aggressive speed, interrupting Grant mid-sentence. He was young, perhaps 25, with the same weathered look as most of the locals. "Or perhaps dessert. We have cloudberry cream tonight." "We're fine for now," David said, slightly taken aback by the interruption. "The fish was excellent," Ben added. The waiter nodded curtly and moved away, but Chloe noticed he lingered nearby, close enough to overhear their conversation. When Dr. Grant started to continue the explanation, the waiter reappeared. "How was your meal?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Everything to your satisfaction?" "Yes, thank you," Chloe said. "Good, good. And you are excited for the lighthouse? The Aurora should be spectacular." "We're looking forward to it," David said curtly, his annoyance at the continued interruptions beginning to show. The waiter nodded and finally moved away, But the interruption had killed the conversation. Jess shrugged and returned to her meal. But Chloe noticed the waiter watching them from across the room. And she wasn't the only one. Several of the staff seemed unusually attentive to their table. Ben cleared his throat to clear the tension and asked Dr. Grant, "What made you choose a doctorate in Norwegian folklore?" Dr. Grant stammered a bit. I love the thrill of chasing a dream and maybe never catching it." "That's deep," replied Ben, as Dr. Grant quietly got up and left the room. Chloe noticed the doctor had been gone for a while. Being the people-pleaser type, she chased after him, giving him space while letting him know she was there. He walked out to the smoking balcony and pulled out a cigarette. A moment later, Chloe stepped up with a smile and a lighter. "Need a light?" Her cheeks pulled wide in a pantomime of innocence. "Thanks, Chloe." She lit the tip of his cigarette, and he puffed on it a few times to engage the flame. "So, your reason for choosing folklore back there, I don't buy it. And I noticed that it made you uncomfortable enough to leave a party in our honor. I'm not saying you have to tell me. I'm just making sure you're okay." Dr. Grant shallowly nodded his head a few times, as if he was giving himself a pep talk. He let out a reedy sigh before speaking. "No, I should be able to talk about it. I'm an adult, and it's been over 20 years now." He paused a second to rally himself. "I had a daughter once. Her name was Lily, and she was the light of my life. But I was working long hours at my trading firm, and in the end I chose to neglect everything and everyone in pursuit of the almighty dollar. One night I was supposed to pick her up from soccer practice, but the market crashed, and I chose to try to salvage my earnings. The police only found her left shoe and a small hand-carved doll in her likeness. The search dragged on for months with no progress. I was spending my days combing the woods and my nights drawing at the bar. The night I was considering ending it all, I overheard a couple of folklore and mythology majors discussing the Fae for their project. They were listing the traits of some of the monsters, and a carved doll effigy was among them. It suddenly all made sense. Why no one could find her, why there was no sign of the abductor, and most puzzling of all, the effigy. I realized her abduction must be supernatural in origin. This was a pretty shocking revelation. The Fae actually existed. I immediately sought the professor, a man named Gregerson, and together we uncovered enough circumstantial evidence to conclude that a Fae had taken her. Driven by my obsession, I devoted my entire life to the study of folklore and the search for the creature that kidnapped my daughter. To date, I have exhaustively disproven several sightings and uncovered the true stories behind some local village legends, but I have not learned anything new about my daughter's abductors. Dr. Grant hung his head as he spoke the last line, vainly trying to hide his eyes as they began to water. "Are you all right, Doctor?" Chloe asked with concern, noting his shift in demeanor. "Yes, I will be all right, thank you, Chloe. I should prepare for tomorrow's tours. Good night." Dr. Grant finished, and made his way to the exit. Chloe felt a deep sadness as she watched the broken man shamble away. It was clear that he had chosen to believe a fairy tale over the harsh reality of what he had done. She decided to return to the others, but keep this exchange to herself. After dinner, the group returned to their rooms to rest before tomorrow's busy day. Ben spent the time checking his equipment while Chloe lay on the bed scrolling through the photos they'd taken that day. "Look at this," she said suddenly. Ben came over. She'd zoomed in on a photo of the harbor taken that afternoon. In the background, barely visible among the fishing boats, was a figure. A man, standing on one of the boats, facing the camera. The distance and quality made the details impossible to discern, but something was unsettling about the way he stood, perfectly still, while everything else in the frame moved. "Probably just a fisherman," Ben said. "Probably," Chloe agreed, but she didn't sound convinced. Chloe awoke suddenly. The hotel room was dark except for the faint glow of the alarm clock. 10:32 p.m. The faint ethereal sound of music had woken her, a stringed instrument. It was beautiful and haunting, and sounded as if it were coming from outside. She slipped out of bed and crept to the window, peering through the glass. The harbor was dark. The fishing boats were silhouettes against the inky water. On the pier where they'd met the old man earlier stood a figure. He was tall and slender, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothes, a long coat, breeches, and high boots. He was holding a golden fiddle, its surface gleaming even in the faint moonlight. As she watched, he looked up, his face a pale oval in the darkness. He seemed to be looking right at her. A cold dread washed over Chloe. She stumbled back from the window, her heart pounding. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them again, he was gone. She stood there for a long time, her heart racing. It was just a dream, she told herself, a nightmare brought on by the old man's story. But the music had felt so real. The next morning the sky was a bruised purple, the air laden with the promise of a storm. The group met for breakfast, their conversations subdued. Chloe didn't mention her experience. She was sure they'd tell her she should skip the tour and get some rest. Instead, their morning was spent on a guided tour of the outskirts of Kråkvik, a slice-of-life experience designed to show them the realities of rural Norwegian life. Their first stop was a small, wind-swept sheep farm overlooking the sea. The air was thick with the smell of lanolin and damp earth. The farmer, a weathered man named Lars, with a face as rugged as the coastline, communicated more through his work than his words. He gave a masterful demonstration of sheep shearing, his hands moving with a speed and precision that left Jess struggling to get a good shot for her blog, adding to the others' amusement. One of the lambs bolted from her during an attempt at a selfie. Next, they visited a fish-smoking hut, an ancient, dark building where the air was thick with the aromatic smoke of alderwood and salt. Hundreds of cod hung from the rafters like leathery ghosts, their bodies slowly turning golden in the gloom. The owner, a silent, pipe-smoking man, simply nodded at them as they entered, his presence as much a part of the atmosphere as the smoke itself. David, the software engineer, looked particularly out of place, his city clothes a stark contrast to the raw, elemental nature of the place. Dr. Grant called it a temple to the bounty and brutality of the sea. Their final stop was the cottage of a woman named Astrid, a tiny, cheerful woman with a galaxy of wrinkles around her kind eyes. Her home had a traditional sod roof and a small, meticulously tended vegetable garden. Inside, it was warm and smelled of coffee and cardamom. Astrid showed them how to make lefse, the traditional Norwegian flatbread, on a cast-iron stove that had been in her family for generations. She offered them a piece, warm and spread with butter and sugar. It was simple, perfect, and deeply comforting. Suddenly Ben felt the call of nature. Astrid smiled and pointed him to the hallway leading towards the rear of the house. As he walked down the narrow hallway, a flickering light from a slightly ajar door caught his eye. Curiosity piqued. He peeked inside. It was a small, dark room, almost a closet. On a small table was a shrine. In the center stood a small, hand-carved statuette of a fisherman dressed in what looked like 1600s-era clothing. At its feet was a small, shallow bowl of water, its surface reflecting the flickering candlelight of a single, tall candle. The air was thick with the smell of wax and something else that he couldn't place. Ben stared for a moment, an uneasy feeling creeping over him. He quickly used the bathroom and rejoined the group. As they walked back toward the bus, he told the others what he'd seen. Dr. Grant nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a fisherman's shrine. It's an old tradition. Families would have them in their homes to pray for the safety of their loved ones at sea. A small offering of water, a candle to light their way home. It's a way of showing respect to the sea, of asking for its mercy." Chloe went pale. The casual academic explanation did nothing to calm the sudden, frantic beating of her heart. "The long coat," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The boots, the clothes, they were from the 1600s. The others looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" David asked. "My dream," she said, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "The man I saw outside the window was wearing the same clothes." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group, the comforting warmth of Astrid's cottage replaced by a creeping dread. The remainder of the trip was uneventful, and the spine-chilling revelation slowly faded into memory as the group took in Scandinavia's untouched splendor. That evening, the group gathered at the designated bus stop, the wind whipping at their jackets. The sky was now a dark, angry gray. They were the first to arrive, well ahead of the other tourists. "I don't like the look of that sky," David said, his voice tight. When the first bus pulled up, Jess had an idea. "I'll give you 500 kroner if you take us to the lighthouse now, ahead of the others," she said to the driver, a young man with a bored expression. "We want to get the best spot for photos." The driver's eyes lit up at the sight of the cash. He glanced around, then shrugged. "Get in," he said. As they drove, the storm began to break. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind buffeted the bus as it crossed the narrow causeway, the only road connecting the lighthouse island to the mainland. "Are you sure we'll be safe out there?" Dr. Grant asked, his voice laced with concern. "The lighthouse has been decommissioned for decades, hasn't it?" The driver laughed. "Don't worry. A few years ago, a wealthy benefactor bought the whole island, poured millions into it. The lighthouse is completely remodeled, state-of-the-art, safer than your own home now. There's even a little museum in the basement with all the old stuff." He pulled up to the base of the lighthouse, a towering black and white cylinder against the stormy sky. "Here you are. I'll be back in about 40 minutes with the others. Explore, take your photos. Just stay inside if the weather gets bad." Dr. Grant leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "I have to ask, you're American, aren't you? Your accent. How did you end up driving a tour bus in rural Norway?" The driver glanced at him in the rear-view mirror, his smile quick and professional. "A work visa, good pay, and a beautiful country. He gestured out at the storm, though the weather takes some getting used to. He turned the bus around and headed back across the causeway. As it drove away, a light post lit up the logo on the back of the bus. It was a hollow cogwheel with the initials S.J. in red and black letters. "Huh," Ben muttered, squinting through the rain. "That's an odd logo for a local tour company. Looks pretty corporate." The group dashed into the lighthouse, laughing as the cold rain soaked them in seconds. The heavy oak door swung shut behind them, and the surprising warmth of a modern central heating system greeted them. "Wow," Jess said, pulling out her phone to film. "5-star lighthouse living, guys." Ben headed straight up to the observation deck and set up his tripod, eager to capture the dramatic waves crashing against the rocks below. Dr. Grant, his curiosity piqued by the mention of a museum, headed off to explore the basement. Jess was already filming a panoramic sweep of the living quarters, narrating about the cozy lighthouse vibes for her followers. David collapsed onto one of the modernized benches, grateful to be out of the storm. "This place is actually pretty nice," Jess said, panning her camera across the renovated interior. "Look at this, heated floors and modern lighting." Chloe wandered through the space, taking in the blend of historic charm and contemporary comfort. The original stone walls had been preserved, but everything else felt almost luxurious. It was hard to reconcile this warm, well-appointed space with the ominous warnings they'd received. After a few minutes, she climbed the spiral staircase to join Ben on the observation deck. The view was breathtaking and terrifying. The storm had intensified, and the sea was a churning mass of gray and white. "The tide's coming in fast," Ben said, not looking up from his camera. He was adjusting his settings, trying to capture the drama of the waves. "Look at the size of those swells." Chloe pressed closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The waves were noticeably larger now, and dangerously close to breaking over the causeway. "Ben," she said, her voice tight, "look at the road." He lowered his camera and followed her gaze. His face went pale. "You guys!" Chloe called down the stairs, her voice sharp with alarm. "Get up here, now!" The others rushed up, crowding around the observation window. They watched in horrified silence as a massive wave, far larger than the others, rose up like a gray wall and crashed down onto the narrow strip of land. The causeway vanished completely beneath the churning, frothing water. For a moment, no one spoke. They just stared at the place where the road had been. "It'll go back down, right?" Jess asked, her voice small, "when the wave passes?" But the water didn't recede. Another wave crashed over the submerged causeway, and then another. The road was gone, swallowed by the sea. Jess was the first to break. "Oh my God, we're stuck here," she cried, her voice rising in panic. "We're trapped. What are we going to do?" "There's no cell service," David said, his face grim as he lowered his phone. "So we can't call for help?" Ben asked, turning away from the window. "We're just stuck here until the storm passes? When will that be?" "It could be days," Jess wailed, pacing back and forth. "We don't have any food. We're going to starve." "Everyone, calm down," Dr. Grant said, his voice firm but steady. He placed a reassuring hand on Jess's shoulder. "Panicking will not help. Let's assess the situation logically. We are in a secure, modern building. We have heat and light. We are safe from the storm. The driver knows we are here. As soon as the storm breaks and the tide recedes, they will send help. We are not in any immediate danger." His calm, authoritative tone had a soothing effect. Jess stopped pacing, and Ben took a deep breath. "He's right," David said. "Freaking out isn't going to solve anything." "So what do we do?" Chloe asked, her voice small. "Just wait?" Dr. Grant's eyes twinkled with a hint of his earlier academic excitement. "We do more than wait," he said. "Think about it. We have this entire historic lighthouse to ourselves. No other tourists, no guides rushing us along. This is a unique opportunity for unabated exploration. Who knows what we might find? Let's treat this not as a crisis, but as an adventure." The idea of exploring the lighthouse, of turning their predicament into an adventure, was a welcome distraction from their fear. It gave them a way to reclaim some control over their situation. The main floor housed the keeper's living quarters, which were Spartan and tidy. They found a small kitchen, a bedroom with a narrow cot, and a living area with a pot-bellied stove. But it was a heavy iron door at the back of the living area, marked Maskenraum, that drew their attention. "Engine room," Dr. Grant translated, "must lead to the basement." The door was unlocked. It opened onto a steep, narrow flight of stone steps, and a wave of cold, damp air, thick with the smell of salt and oil, washed over them. They descended cautiously, using their phone flashlights to illuminate the way. The basement was a single, large, circular room. In the center, covered by a massive, dusty tarp, was a colossal object. Ben pulled back a corner of the tarp, and his flashlight beam glinted off 1,000 facets of glass. It was the old Fresnel lens, a beautiful, intricate beehive of glass and brass, sitting cold and silent in the dark. Against the far wall were several wooden crates and metal filing cabinets, all marked Archive, Archive. "This must be the museum the driver had mentioned. Let's see what we've got," Dr. Grant said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space as he pried open one of the crates. It was filled with leather-bound logbooks. For the next hour, they lost themselves in the history of the lighthouse. The logs were mostly mundane: weather observations, records of passing ships, supply requests, but they painted a picture of a lonely, isolated life. They found old newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, detailing the lighthouse's construction, the shipwrecks it had prevented, the lives it had saved. Ben found a series of photographs documenting the lighthouse's construction. One showed a massive metal crate being winched up from a barge onto the rocks below. "That must be the original lens mechanism," Dr. Grant said, pointing to the photo. "The Fresnel lens. It would have been shipped in a crate like that." Then, in a dusty filing cabinet, Dr. Grant found a different kind of journal. It was smaller than the official logbooks, bound in worn black leather. The handwriting was neat, precise. The first entry was dated 1983. He began to read aloud. The first several entries were filled with personal musings, complaints about the cold, and notes about his family back on the mainland. Then, an entry that froze them all. "October 12th, 1983, Grant read. "Worried about my brother, Olav. He took his boat out this morning, and the weather is turning. He's a good fisherman, the best in Kråkvik, but the sea is unforgiving. I lit a candle for him, as Mother always did. Olav, Chloe whispered. The old man on the pier? His brother was the last keeper, Ben realized. The one who drowned. Grant kept reading. A few pages later, another entry. November 2nd, 1983. A strange delivery today. A large shipping crate brought by a private barge. The men who delivered it were not locals. They said it was specialized equipment for the lighthouse, part of a new government initiative. But there was no official paperwork. They paid me in cash to keep quiet about it. I don't like it. The crate is down by the salt pools. They said it was too heavy to bring up to the lighthouse. Grant flipped forward a few more pages, finding another entry. November 5th, 1983, he read, his voice barely a whisper. I hear music at night. A beautiful, terrible music. It seems to be coming from the north side of the island, from the direction of the crate. It calls to me. I find myself wanting to go to it. I have to lock myself in at night to keep from walking out into the storm. God help me. What is happening here? The winds of the storm had been whipping the waves larger and larger, and a substantially sized wave managed to take out several power lines for the lighthouse, the lights inside immediately going dark and settling a deathly hush on everyone. Just when Jess was about to say something, a musical note drifted down the stairs. What was that? Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. Another note floated on the air, seeming to come from all directions at once, masking the storm's rage. Chloe moved toward the stairs, and by the time she reached them, a beautiful melody was forming. As she climbed through, it began to morph into a sinister undertone that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Her heart began to race. She felt a compulsion building in her chest, a need to go outside, to find the source of the music. Her feet moved faster, climbing the stairs toward the door, and then she remembered. The music from the hotel, the wet man, Olav's warning. Piecing it together quickly, she shouted back to everyone, "Cover your ears!" as she slammed her palms hard against the sides of her head, pressing her ears shut. The effect was immediate. The compulsion drained from her body like water from a broken vessel. The tension in her chest released, and she could breathe again. The music was still there, a muffled throb through her palms, but the terrible pull was gone. "Do it!" she screamed at the others. "Cover your ears! Don't listen to it!" The others followed her lead, a frantic scramble. Ben jammed his fingers into his ears. David pressed his palms flat against his head. Jess tore strips from a nearby curtain, stuffing the fabric into her ears. Dr. Grant found some cotton wadding and a first aid kit and stuffed his ears. As soon as their ears were blocked, the same relief washed over each of them. The compulsion had vanished. They stood there, breathing hard, looking at each other with wide, terrified eyes. "Våtmannen," Dr. Grant whispered. Hours passed. David's fingers, jammed deep into his ears, had gone numb. His shoulders burned with a fire that spread down his spine. Every few minutes, he had to shift his weight from one foot to the other, his legs trembling with the effort of standing still for so long. He tried to lower himself to the floor, thinking that if he could just lie down, rest his arms against the floorboards, he might be able to hold on a little longer. But his exhausted muscles betrayed him. He slipped on the damp floor, and in his attempt to catch himself, he landed on his left index finger, bending it backward at a sickening angle. The pain was blinding, white-hot. David screamed, a raw sound of agony, and before he could react, the music rushed in. David's face went slack, and a look of blissful, ecstatic wonder replaced the agony in his eyes. "Oh, God," Chloe whispered, watching in horror. A slow smile spread across his face. "I hear it," he whispered. "It's a beautiful dance." He stood, the pain seemingly done, and began to move, his body swaying to the rhythm of the unseen fiddle. He danced to the heavy oak door and threw it open, the storm roaring into the room. And then he danced out into the rain and the wind, a silhouette of mad joy against the raging sea. On a rocky point at the edge of the island, the figure of Våtmannen stood, his golden fiddle catching the lightning flashes. He was playing, his fingers moving with impossible speed, his eyes fixed on the approaching dancer. David danced right up to him, his face a mask of pure ecstasy, and reached out as if to embrace the source of the beautiful music. Våtmannen stopped playing, and the spell shattered. David blinked. The ecstasy drained from his face, replaced by dawning horror. He looked down at his hands, one still reaching toward the creature, the other with his broken finger jutting out like a twisted branch. The pain hit him again, a white-hot lance of agony that made him gasp and stagger backward. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "No, what did I—" He looked around wildly. The storm, the rocks, the sea crashing just feet away. He was outside. How had he gotten outside? His friends were tiny figures in the doorway of the lighthouse, their faces pale with horror. "Help!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "Help me!" He tried to run, but his legs were weak, his muscles trembling. He took one step, then another, slipping on the wet rocks. His broken finger throbbed with each heartbeat, the pain making him dizzy. Våtmannen watched him with deep, ocean-colored eyes. There was a patient hunger behind them, like a predator stalking its prey. Then he pounced. He moved with an unnatural speed, his face twisting into a mask of monstrous hunger. He threw himself upon David, clamping his dripping hands over David's face, and began smothering him. David tried to scream, tried to fight, his good hand clawing at the creature's arms, but it was like fighting the ocean itself. One of his swipes caught his broken finger on the creature's coat, and the pain was blinding. His desperate struggle grew weaker, his movements more sluggish, as his life was extinguished on the wet black rocks in the storm. Våtmannen stood, gripping David's corpse by the ankle, and dragged it across the rocks, into the sea with him. Inside the lighthouse, the 4 remaining members scrambled back from the open doorway. The image of David's suffocation burned into their minds. Jess vomited, her whole body heaving with such force that her legs gave out. Ben caught her before she collapsed, his own hands shaking so badly he could barely hold her up. "He's gone," Chloe whispered, her voice hollow. "David's gone." Dr. Grant, his face ashen, stumbled back from the window. "My God," he whispered, his academic curiosity replaced by raw, visceral horror. "What are we going to do?" Jess sobbed, her body racked with tremors. "It's going to come back for us." "We have to barricade the door," Ben said, his voice taking on a frantic edge. They sprang into action, their panic giving way to a desperate, frenzied energy. They dragged the old keeper's desk, the pot-bellied stove, and the heavy wooden benches over and piled them against the main door. They worked in a frantic, terrified silence. The only sounds were the grunts of exertion and Jess's sobs. When they were finished, The living quarters was a fortress. They huddled together in the center of the room. Every creak of the old lighthouse, every gust of wind made them jump. Time seemed to stretch as the silent terror gripped the group. Finally, Ben had had enough and spoke up. "We can't just sit here," he said, his voice raspy. "We can't just wait for it to come back." "What do you suggest we do, Ben?" Jess snapped, her voice sharp with grief and anger. "No, I mean, maybe there is a way to fight it, a way to stop it." "Maybe there are more journals," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe there are other records, something that tells us more about it. We only looked through one crate of logbooks. There were others. And the filing cabinets, we only checked one of them," Dr. Grant said. "So we have to go back down there," Ben said. A fresh wave of terror washed over the group. The thought of leaving their fortified living area was almost unbearable. "We can't split up," Jess said, her voice trembling. "We have to stay together." "She's right," Chloe agreed. "We can't risk it." "But we can't just sit here and wait to die," Ben argued, his voice rising. "I'll go," Dr. Grant said quietly. They all turned to look at him. The professor, shaken by David's death, now seemed to have found a new resolve. "I'm the one who should go," he said. "I'm a folklore researcher. I know what to look for. You three search up here. I'll be back as soon as I find something." "No," Chloe said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "It's more dangerous to do nothing," Dr. Grant countered. "We need information, and the only place we might find one is in those archives." They argued for several minutes, but Dr. Grant was right. They couldn't just sit there and wait. Reluctantly, Chloe agreed. "Be careful," she said, her voice tight with fear. "I will, Chloe. You take care of them as well," he said. "I'll be back before you know it." He entered the stairwell and closed the door behind him. Down in the basement, Dr. Grant moved with a sense of purpose. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a lifetime of academic curiosity. He was in the presence of something that seemed to be very real, and he needed to be sure of what he was dealing with. He opened another of the ledger crates and began to sift through the logbooks. He found more of the same weather reports and shipping logs, so he moved to the filing cabinets and found them filled with official documents, maintenance records, and correspondence with the government. He was about to give up when he found a thick, leather-bound ledger tucked away in the back of a drawer. It was mostly filled with dry accounting, fuel costs, supply orders, and maintenance expenses. But as he flipped through the pages, a single folded piece of paper slipped out from between them. It was a shipping manifest, dated 1982. His eyes scanned the document. It detailed the delivery of a single large crate marked hazardous materials, biological. The shipping company was listed as Skarlagen Nar, but the logo was a familiar corporate design, a hollow cogwheel with the initials S.J. at its center. S.J. Dr. Grant mouthed the letters, a flicker of recognition in his mind. The logo had been on the back of the tour bus. He set the manifest down, his mind racing. Someone had shipped some dangerous creature here in the 80s, and whoever had done it was likely tied to the tour company. He heard a soft rustling sound behind him and turned. In the far corner of the basement, partially hidden behind the old Fresnel lens, a part of the canvas top was billowing gently, as if caught in a breeze. Dr. Grant approached and slowly reached out, gripped the edge of the top, and, with a sharp breath in, pulled it up, revealing a small hatch door. It was circular and made of heavy iron, with a wheel lock at its center, like on a submarine. The door was pitted with rust and salt corrosion, but the hinges looked well oiled. Dr. Grant knelt beside it, his hands trembling. Every instinct screamed at him to leave it alone, to run. But he was a researcher and a man of discipline. His entire life had been built on the principle of seeking truth, no matter where it led. His fingers closed around the wheel lock, and he turned. Nothing happened. The hinges may have been oiled, but the wheel felt rusted solid. He took a deep breath and planted his feet. The wheel resisted at first, grinding against decades of salt and rust, but it finally gave way. He pulled the door open, and a wave of cold, damp air rushed up from below, carrying with it the smell of salt and rot. A ladder with rusted metal rungs descended into the darkness. Grant shone his flashlight down, but the beam didn't make a dent in the tenebrosity. The obvious choice of closing the hatch and returning upstairs to find a way out of this situation never even crossed his mind. Dr. Michael Grant was, at his core, a man possessed, and now he found himself potentially within arm's reach of real proof of his efforts. Within seconds he was on the ladder. The descent felt endless, rung after rung after rung after rung. The air growing colder and damper, the deeper underground he traveled. His phone light bounced off the algae-covered stone walls, illuminating the immediate area in sweeping arcs. The roar of the ocean could be heard, but it was muted, as if it were on the other side of a wall. A dim glow began at the perceived bottom of the ladder. It grew a little brighter as he neared the end, and he could make out that the floor was made of wet, flattened rocks. He stepped off the ladder into a chamber, maybe 15 feet across, but perfectly circular, carved from the living rock. The walls glittered under his flashlight beam, but the true horror lay in the center of the room. There was a raised stone platform with a man-sized nest made of thick layers of dried kelp and seaweed, but the kelp on the top layer still looked fresh. Across the room from the nest was a hole in the floor. Dr. Grant approached it slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. The hole was perhaps 4 feet across, and when he shone his light down into it, he could see the black ocean water moving with a slight current from somewhere. Dr. Grant's mind reeled. This must be Våtmannen's lair. He quickly started searching around the room, looking for anything that could help. He moved to the wall and saw something carved into the stone. He moved closer, opening his camera app. It was a rune stone, an actual, genuine rune stone, fitted directly into the chamber wall. The runes were old but perfectly preserved, as if freshly carved. He took a few pictures, then went back to searching the room, moving to the kelp nest. As he drew closer to the nest, the odor of rot became much stronger. Dr. Grant struggled not to gag as he stepped up and peeked inside, intending to get a quick look and then run away. But his eyes alighted on a rather large diamond necklace that was poking out of the leaves. He made the split-second decision that he was safe enough, and he snatched the necklace up. But it only moved a few inches before getting stuck on something. He pulled his shirt up over his nose and breathed in shallow breaths, minimizing the amount of rot he inhaled with each breath. Once he was fully sated, he pulled with more force and felt the necklace dislodge. He increased the torque on his pull, and the tension on the other end of the necklace gave way, as the necklace and the neck it was around came flying out of the kelp and seaweed. Dr. Grant let go of the necklace and leaped backwards, shrieking in terror. He turned and raced back up the ladder, his lust for adventure replaced by his fight or flight response. He still had the presence of mind to hang on to his phone and the document he found in the ledger, though. Once he reached the basement, he quickly closed the hatch and went around searching for something to bar the hatch with. He found an old crowbar that must have been used to open the crates in the photos of the lighthouse's construction, and jammed it into the lock mechanism, sealing the hatch shut. Having created separation between himself and the threat, Dr. Grant took a moment to steady himself before wobbling over to a chair in the corner of the room. He sat down heavily, his body shivering uncontrollably from the adrenaline, and began to box breathe. In 2, 3, 4. Out 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Repeat. Having calmed himself, Dr. Grant pulled out his phone, opened the gallery app, selected the picture of the rune, then took out his notebook and pen. Achata, chifti-chuva. Halfway through translating the first galder, a flash of light burst behind Dr. Grant's eyes, fading just as quickly. He shook his head to clear the sensation and returned to translating, telling himself it was just shock. Not long after, though, he was hit by another flash, but this one came with a vision. Våtmannen, alive and human before a crowd, playing the fiddle. He misses a note, and the crowd rumbles with dissatisfaction, visibly frustrated by his mistake and the audience's reaction. The man strikes another wrong chord, producing a cat-like screech that makes the audience flinch, and some rise and leave. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Dr. Grant staring at the inscription again. A moment later he regained his wits, having processed all that he had just witnessed. His first thought was to rush up the stairs and share the experience with the others. But then his rational mind kicked in, and he realized the vision might not be directly linked to the runes he was translating. It was much more likely that his frightening experience in the cave below had amped his adrenaline and anxiety too much, and he had just had a simple mini-stroke. He continued translating, deciphering the name Birgir, and was once again blinded by a vision, this time of the man sleeping in a hammock in the forecastle of a ship, his once fine clothes now soiled and torn. A shout from above deck startles him awake, and he leaps out of the sling, landing firmly on his feet. The shout rings out again, and he rushes up the stairs to the top deck. As soon as his head cleared deck level, he heard a whistle and turned, just in time to catch a boot to the face. The force of the impact knocked him out, and his unconscious body crashed to the ground, only to roll slowly down the sloped steps. Dr. Grant once again came to his senses, though there was no denying it this time. That vision had been a direct result of translating the galder. This should have terrified him, but he was in too deep. I can find the answers in these visions, he justified to himself as he continued to translate. Nearly halfway through the engraving, he was struck by a third vision, the man drunk at a tavern, listening to a brilliant musician. After the show, he approaches him and asks how he got so good. The corners of the man's mouth stretch a bit too far as he tells him about the Wishmaster. The vision flashes forward to the man entering a beaded doorway into a heavily incensed, dimly lit room with a small table and 2 chairs. A wizened old man appears from a side room and bows, motioning for him to sit. They both sit down at the table, and the old man takes a long look, sizing him up before smiling and extending his hand. Velkommen, Birgir. The man stops for a second, struck that he knew his name, But he quickly recovered, remembering he was here to speak to a mystic. The two men clasp hands, and for a split second, both men's eyes glow red. When they unclasped the handshake, the deal was complete, and the man left the tent. No other words were spoken. The vision moves forward in time to show the man playing to a packed crowd, and then later that night, in a hotel room full of drunk women, the man silently smothers one before quietly returning to bed. Dr. Grant came to his senses again and stared at the runes. Only one Galder was remaining, but a sudden droplet of blood splashed on the phone screen. He reached up and felt the blood dripping from his nose. He wiped his screen, took a deep breath, and began reading the final Galder. He expected it, but was still unprepared as another vision overtook him. Time moved forward in great leaps, and he watched as the man played out a repeating pattern of performance and murder again and again. But the longer he continued, the more he began to change. It started gradually, with a light greenish hue spreading across his body. After 20 years, his entire body had taken on a mottled green and black appearance. No one wanted to hire a monster to play music at their fancy dinner party. But he still had the compulsion to kill. After so long, it had become a comforting ritual that he could perform when things got a little too much. He used his tainted talent to lure people to the riverside, where he would drown and stab them to death, offering them as his sacrifice to the old man in return for his gift. Gradually, over centuries, he ceased to be Birgir the musician and became Våtmannen, the murderous spirit. In a cruel twist, he found he was able to grant certain boons to mortals, but he would only grant them to those who offered him sacrifice. He amassed a cult following of murderous zealots that once terrorized the coasts of Norway before the kingdoms banded together and hunted them to near extinction, making it a crime punishable by death to worship Våtmannen. Dr. Grant began to hear whispers in the vision, as if something were attempting to speak directly to him. "I know where she is. I can show you." He knew it was a trick, but it was the one trick that he couldn't afford to ignore. "Show me," he whispered hollowly. The vision shifted to show the wooded trail where his daughter had disappeared. Dr. Grant felt a cold vice start to close around his heart as the realization set in. He let out a sudden gasping sob as his daughter, alive and exactly as he remembered her, came skipping down the path. He tried to call out to her, tried to move, but he was only a spectator in Våtmannen's dream. Then there was a flash of movement as something large and green shot out of the woods and snatched her. A troll, an actual living troll, held her in his massive hands, sniffing her hair curiously. Dr. Grant's heart began to pound, threatening to explode under the adrenaline coursing through him. Then, without warning, the troll opened his maw and shoved her head inside, slamming his jaws shut with a squelching pop, severing her head in a clean bite. Dr. Grant felt his bowels release. The troll finished chewing and swallowed the mushy goop, raising her body to his mouth again for another bite. He had to watch as the troll finished her off entirely. Only her left shoe remained after it had fallen off during her consumption. By the time it was finished, Dr. Grant's mind had broken, reducing him to a sobbing and gibbering mess. His only coherent request was, "Kill me!" Våtmannen approached Dr. Grant and took his head in his hands, forcing their eyes to meet. The gaze of Våtmannen was intense, peering directly into Dr. Grant's tormented soul. "You are ready, Michael Grant. You belong to me." Dr. Grant was powerless, and was about to accept his end at this monster's hands, when it continued, "You will serve me, and I will give her back to you." Dr. Grant snapped back to himself, finding the strength deep within himself to speak. "You can do that?" he asked shakily. "That and much more, Michael Grant. Will you serve me?" Dr. Grant did not spare a second thought. Yes, I will serve you, to get my daughter back." Both Dr. Grant's and Våtmannen's eyes glowed red briefly, and when he was released, Dr. Grant felt a new sense of purpose. "Deliver them to me before the sun rises, and she will return," Våtmannen hissed in his low voice, and then the vision ended. Dr. Grant found he was sitting in the basement, in soiled clothing, still clutching his phone and the note from the ledger. He immediately deleted the photo and tore the note into scraps, which he then ate. He unbarred the hatch door and descended into Våtmannen's lair. Stripping his clothes off, he began to wash himself and his underclothes in the sea water below the cave. Once he was finished, he climbed back out of the lair and closed the hatch, leaving it unbarred, and ascended the stairs to rejoin the group. The others had spent their time roving the base of the lighthouse, checking for any gaps in their barricade, while also looking for more information on the mysterious island, and it seemed they were successful, as Dr. Grant emerged from the basement to find the group huddled together in the keeper's room. Chloe caught sight of him and hurriedly waved him over. "Dr. Grant, we've found a radio," she said excitedly. Dr. Grant looked from her to the ham radio that had been covered by a cloth sheet previously, which, despite the power being out, was powered on with static crackling softly over the speaker. "Do you know how to use one, Doctor?" asked Ben. Dr. Grant smiled inwardly at their ignorance. "No, I'm afraid I don't, Ben," he replied in a smooth and sweet tone. "Say, how is that thing still on when the power's out for the rest of the building?" "Probably a backup generator somewhere on the island," Ben replied as he returned to fiddling with the knobs and buttons, searching for a signal. "I found Våtmannen's lair beneath the tower," Dr. Grant said nonchalantly. "You found what?" shouted Jess, after the words sunk in. "You mean it lives beneath us?" She was shaking now, her anxiety going into overdrive as she imagined the creatures sneaking up when they were all asleep and dragging them back down to its lair. "Yes, but it was empty. Perhaps it has another home or feeding location. I didn't see David's body either," Dr. Grant stated. "I think we could set a trap to capture or maybe even kill it, but we would have to strike now, while it's away," he said, laying the foundation of his nefarious plot. A look of uneasiness swept across the group, and they wrestled with the new plan of action. Dr. Grant continued, "There isn't enough room for all of us, and it wouldn't make much sense for us all to go down there and get caught unawares. Ben, why don't you come with me? This is a job best fit for a young strapping lad such as yourself. No need to put the womenfolk in more danger." "Dr. Grant, are you okay?" asked Chloe. "You are talking in a weird way, and it's freaking me out a little," she finished. Dr. Grant looked at her, his eyes burning with something. "Yes, it's probably just the extreme stress that we are all under. Being alone in the basement likely didn't do me any favors either." This answer seemed to assure Chloe as she reluctantly went back to examining the radio. "So, Ben, what do you say? Shall we trap this monster so we can escape?" Dr. Grant refocused his attention on Ben, who was considering the outcomes. "Do you really think we can trap it down there, or even kill it?" he asked incredulously. "Without a doubt, Ben. I can guarantee this is the right plan of action," Dr. Grant said confidently, extending his hand to Ben. Ben took the hand, stood, and together they made their way down to the basement. "It's just over here," Dr. Grant said as he moved to the hatch door and pulled up the tarp. Gripping the handle, he twisted and pulled, opening the hatch and letting the wave of fetid sea air rush into the room. Ben gagged as the smell hit him and started to turn to run back upstairs when Dr. Grant called out to him. "Come on, Ben. We don't have time to waste here." Ben cursed his shitty luck and moved to the opening, trying to shine his phone light down into the depths. Dr. Grant stealthily moved behind him and gave him a forceful shove, sending him tumbling down into the darkness. Ben landed hard on his left leg, and the resulting crack and jolts of pain that tore through his leg told him it was broken. He lay on the ground, moaning, trying to reach his leg to look at it. Dr. Grant descended the ladder slowly, taking his time and ensuring he didn't slip or miss a rung. Stepping down off the ladder into the room again, he took a quick look around and strode over to Ben's prone form. "I'm sorry, Ben, but you have to understand, this is for my daughter," he said as he bent down and grabbed the foot of Ben's broken leg and began dragging him towards the sea-hole. Ben's screams bounced off the smooth walls as each step Dr. Grant took pulled his leg sharply. "He is going to return her to me, he showed me. I just have to give him what he wants, and I can have her back. You understand, right?" Dr. Grant said, dropping Ben's leg near the hole, his screams continuing to echo inside the lair. Dr. Grant squatted down next to Ben and gently placed his hands on either side of his head. "You're not worth her life, right, Ben?" He then gripped his ears tightly and began bashing his head against the rock floor. Ben's screams turned into gurgles as blood filled his throat from the savage beating. Dr. Grant let go of Ben's head and gripped his torso. Lifting him up off of the floor, he carried him over to the sea-hole and dropped him in. The splash of freezing water shocked Ben back to awareness, and he immediately started struggling to stay afloat, his broken leg sending shock waves of pain through his body each time he kicked. Suddenly, he felt a hand grip his useless foot and forcefully yank him under the surface. Looking under at the hand, Ben saw Våtmannen. He tried to hold his breath, but his panic was overwhelming. He let out a scream, releasing the remainder of his saved air, as Våtmannen began to pull him down into the depths. Ben's chest burned, his lungs were starved of oxygen as he thrashed to break free of Våtmannen's death grip. Våtmannen continued to drag him down lower, and the edges of his vision began to turn black. Finally, he could resist the urge no longer. He gulped a lungful of water, hoping only to make the end come quickly. Våtmannen watched as Ben slowly stopped thrashing and became stilled, slowly bobbing in the underwater current. Våtmannen pulled his body down to his level and began to feast, biting directly into Ben's neck and ripping out chunks of flesh and muscle. The water around them began to muddle with the crimson cloud that billowed out of the gashes. Back in the lair, Dr. Grant inhaled deeply, a look of satisfaction on his face as he felt the Våtmannen feed. He took a few moments to clean himself off again and headed back up the ladder to the basement. This time he closed and barred the hatch again, making sure to leave the hatch uncovered as well, for any others who might come looking later. He climbed the stairs and slowly exited the basement, adopting a look of horror and grief, prepared to weave a tale of terror to the others. Jess spotted him first and jogged over to greet him, noticing that Ben was not with him, Then she saw his face in better detail, and she knew immediately that something went wrong. She dropped to her knees and began to sob, the reality too much for her to bear. Drawn by Jess's cries, Chloe rushed over and saw that only Dr. Grant had returned. Dr. Grant launched into his story, Ben falling off the ladder going down into the lair, his broken leg and his screams drawing Våtmannen. I tried to drag him back up the ladder, but he was too heavy, and then he was on us. It was all I could do to escape myself and seal the hatch from the outside before he got me too. He finished. His tale had enough reality in it to fool the group, and though they were all saddened by his loss, no one spoke about Ben again. Hours passed in a state of suspended terror. They huddled together, the silence broken only by the howl of the wind and Jess's sobs. The grief felt like a physical weight pressing down on them, but beneath it was a sharper, colder emotion. Fear. Jess, unable to sit still, began to pace the room, her arms wrapped around herself. She kept glancing at the barricaded door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. It was during one of these restless turns that she heard a voice coming from the door. It was a whisper, faint and pained, barely audible over the storm, but she heard it. It was Ben's voice. "Ben?" she whispered, her heart leaping into her throat. She rushed to the door, pressing her ear against the cold, heavy oak. "So cold," the voice said, a little louder now. I can't feel my leg." "Ben!" she cried, her hands flying to the barricade. "He's alive! He's outside! We have to let him in!" Chloe rushed to her side. "Jess, wait! It could be a trick!" "Let us in, Jess," David's voice said. It was clearer, stronger, but there was something wrong with it. They were like a bad AI vocal clone. "It's so cold out here. We're so cold." "Please, Jess," Ben's voice pleaded. "We're hurt. We need help. Let us in." Jess froze, her hands hovering over the barricade. The hope that had surged through her moments before was replaced by a chilling dread. "What is that?" Chloe whispered, her face pale. "That's not them." "Let us in," the voices chanted in unison, their tones perfectly synchronized, devoid of any human emotion. "Let us in, let us in, let us in." While Jess and Chloe were frozen in terror at the door, Dr. Grant saw his opportunity. He moved to the keeper's room and closed the door. He moved over to the ham radio and ripped the power cord from the back of the radio. He didn't stop there. He tore the antenna cable from its socket, the thick wire snapping with a sharp crack. The radio, their only hope of rescue, was now a dead, silent box. Suddenly, a jagged fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating the main window in a brilliant, blinding flash. For a single heart-stopping second, the storm outside was as bright as day. He was standing on the jagged rocks just beyond the causeway, the waves crashing around his feet. He was tall and gaunt, his skin the color of a drowned man's flesh, his hair a tangled mess of seaweed and kelp. He was wearing the tattered remains of an old lighthouse keeper's uniform, and in his hands he held a fiddle that seemed to be carved from gold. Våtmannen. As the thunder rolled, he raised the fiddle to his chin and began to play. The music was a haunting, ethereal melody that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the storm. It was beautiful and terrible, a song of sorrow and death that promised a cold, silent peace beneath the waves. "The music!" Chloe screamed, her hands flying to her ears. "The earplugs!" They scrambled for their packs, their hands shaking as they fumbled for the small, waxy plugs. Jess, her eyes wide with terror, shoved them into her ears, the world outside dissolving into a dull, muffled roar. Chloe did the same, her face a mask of grim determination. They burst through the keeper's room door to find Dr. Grant standing over the ham radio, the frayed ends of the power and antenna cords clutched in his hand. The ruse was over.
"What did you do?"
Chloe screamed, her voice a mixture of terror and rage. Dr. Grant's face twisted into a snarl, his eyes burning with a fanatic's zeal, and with a guttural roar he lunged at them, his body moving with a speed and ferocity that was utterly inhuman. He tackled Jess, sending them both crashing to the floor. Chloe rushed to help, but Dr. Grant, with a savage backhand, knocked her to the stone floor with a sickening crack, and she lay still, her eyes closed. Jess, her heart was pounding with adrenaline, fought back with a desperate fury. She clawed at Grant's face, her nails digging into his skin, and jabbed her thumb into his eye, causing him to cry out in a high-pitched shriek that was almost inhuman. As if in response, the storm outside swelled, causing the entire lighthouse to groan under the strain. Enraged, Grant bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He lunged at Jess's throat, his teeth sinking into the soft flesh of her neck. She screamed, a gurgling, choked sound, as he bit down and worked his jaw with a savage, chewing motion. He tore through muscle and sinew, the coppery taste of her blood filling his mouth, and with a final brutal rip, he tore a chunk of her throat out, the warm, wet tissue a trophy in his mouth. Jess began to seize, her body convulsing on the floor. Blood spurted from her severed carotid artery, a hot crimson fountain that sprayed across Grant's face and chest. He watched, his eyes wide and unblinking, as the life drained from her, a savage smile playing on his lips. Before she was even still, he grabbed her by the hair and dragged her to the main door, her body leaving a bloody smear on the floor behind them. He threw it open, the storm winds howling into the room, and with a final contemptuous shove, he threw her out into the maelstrom and slammed the door shut, the bolt sliding home with a deafening crack. Outside, Jess lay in a slowly expanding pool of her own blood, her body twitching with the last vestiges of life. Her vision swam, the world fading in and out of focus. Through the driving rain, she saw him approaching, Våtmannen, his movements jerky and unnatural, as if he were teleporting from one spot to the next. The last thing she saw was his waterlogged face leaning over hers, his mouth open to reveal a row of needle-sharp teeth. The world went black. Inside the lighthouse, Dr. Grant watched through the window, his face illuminated by the flashes of lightning, as the Våtmannen knelt over Jess's body, devoured part of her face, and dragged her limp form into the dark waters. His grisly work done, Grant turned from the window, his blood-soaked face a wide, ecstatic grin. He strode over to Chloe's still form, the last piece of his grand offering, and felt a surge of divine purpose as he lifted her into his arms. He carried her down into the belly of the lighthouse, descending the winding stairs into the basement museum, and then down again, through the hidden hatch, into the sacred grotto. The bioluminescent fungi lighting his path as he gently laid her within the nest-like altar of kelp. As he turned to leave, he realized that she could wake up at any moment. He frantically searched the lair, but found nothing. He raced up the ladder and saw that the tarp had some lengths of rope tying it down. Not wanting to waste time, he cut the knots free and used them to bind her wrists and ankles. He then stripped away her outer layers, leaving underwear untouched. This was not an act of sexual perversion, but of purification. She had to be presented in her purest form as the final sacrifice. He fished around in the nest and pulled out a broken piece of bone from his earlier encounter and used it to slice open his palm. Blood, dark and thick, welled up instantly. He dipped his fingers in and began to paint ancient, sprawling runes on her forehead, chest, stomach, and limbs. Each symbol was a word in a forgotten language, a plea and a promise to the Deep One, delivered through him without comprehension. When he was finished, Chloe's body was a canvas of his devotion, the crimson symbols stark against her pale skin. He expected Våtmannen to emerge then, to rise from the dark water and claim his prize. But the grotto remained silent, the hole to the sea a placid black mirror. A flicker of anger crossed Dr. Grant's face. "I must call him," Dr. Grant whispered, his voice raspy. "I must have my reward." He turned and ascended the ladder, leaving Chloe alone in the silent, glowing dark. The cold was the first thing Chloe felt, a deep, biting chill that seeped into her bones. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. She opened her eyes, and terror, sharp and absolute, jolted her into full consciousness. She was in the nightmare chamber from Dr. Grant's stories, bound and half-naked on a bed of seaweed, her skin crawling with the sticky, drying sensation of the blood runes. She began to thrash, pulling at the ropes with a desperate, animalistic strength. The coarse fibers bit into her wrists, but she barely felt the pain. The thought of escaping overwhelmed her senses. Her frantic struggles dislodged her from the kelp nest, and she tumbled onto the cold, damp stone floor. She was still bound, but she was out of the altar. Her eyes darted around the cavern, searching for anything, any hope. Her eyes alighted on the broken bone Dr. Grant had used to cut his palm. Scrabbling like an insect, she managed to get her bound hands around it. Awkwardly, painfully, she began to dig and poke at the thick knot binding her wrists. The bone was sharp, and she cut her own skin several times as she worked, but she didn't stop. The fear of what would happen when the monster came was far worse. Just as she felt the knot begin to loosen, she heard it, a deep, sloshing sound from the hole to the sea. He was coming. With a final desperate yank, her hands came free. She didn't waste a second. She scrambled behind the large, tangled mass of the kelp nest, pressing herself into the shadows just as Våtmannen emerged from the water. Through a small opening in some of the bedding leaves, she watched as Våtmannen stalked to the nest, his gaze fixed on the empty, blood-stained kelp. He saw the ropes and let out a sound of pure, guttural frustration that echoed throughout the chamber and thrashed its head side to side, searching the room. Finding nothing, he let out a final, enraged snarl and dove back into the black water. Chloe didn't dare breathe. She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she gathered her courage enough and sprinted for the ladder, her bare feet slapping against the wet stone, and scrambled up into the basement. She grabbed the rusty crowbar that Dr. Grant had set aside and quietly closed the iron hatch, ramming it through the handles. She fell onto her knees a moment later, the exhaustion catching up to her as the adrenaline worked its way out of her system. For the first time since waking up, she allowed herself to feel. A sob escaped her lips, then another, and soon she was weeping, silent but intense, her body shaking with a storm of grief and terror. Her friends were dead. She was alone, and she was being hunted by a monster and the man she had trusted. Her sobbing was cut short by a new sound from above. It was Dr. Grant's voice, echoing through the lighthouse. "Våtmannen, I have your final offering." He was opening doors and windows, his calls growing louder as the storm threatened to swallow his words. Chloe's eyes fell on the crowbar. She could take it, try to fight him, but the thought of facing him, of what he had become, filled her with a paralyzing fear. No, the crowbar was better here, keeping the hatch sealed. It was her only protection from the thing in the deep. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she slowly, cautiously began to climb the stairs, her mind a blank slate of terror, unsure of what she would do, where she would go. She just knew she had to escape. Upstairs, in the lantern room at the very peak of the lighthouse, Dr. Grant worked with feverish intensity. He had found the old supplies in the museum, a can of whale oil, wicks, and a flint and steel. The great lamp, a marvel of brass and glass, was merely a decoration now, its light long since replaced by an automated electric beacon. But Grant had restored it. With trembling hands he filled the reservoir, threaded the wick, and struck the flint. A spark caught. A small flame flickered to life. He carefully placed the glass chimney over it, and the flame grew, steady and bright. He began to turn the great crank by hand, and the massive Fresnel lens began to rotate. A brilliant, sweeping beam of light illuminated the intensity of the storm. Chloe reached the main floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her eyes darted to the main doors, thrown wide open by Grant, the storm still raging beyond them. She was planning on making a dash for them when she saw Våtmannen standing on the rocks, his form a dark well of shadow in the bright light. Suddenly, a wild shout echoed from the stairs. "Chloe!" Dr. Grant was caught off guard, but his frenzied rage returned quickly. "You will not fuck this up for me, Chloe. You are not worth her life." He raced down the stairs, his face a mask of fury, his eyes burning with mad intent. Chloe didn't panic. She saw Grant closing in, and juked, dodging his clumsy lunge, and bolted towards the winding staircase, her only thought to put as much distance as possible between herself and the madman. She flew up the stairs, her bare feet pounding on the hardwood tread, Grant's insane shouts echoing behind her. She reached the top, the lantern room, and slammed the glass-pane door shut, fumbling with the thin iron bolt, sliding it home just as Grant's body slammed against the other side. He roared, beating on the door with his fists. "You cannot deny me! Your death will bring my Lily back to me!" It was a scene from a nightmare. He began to smash the glass with his fists, rattling the door violently, but soon cracks began to form and splinter out. Chloe screamed as with a final crash, Dr. Grant shattered enough of the glass to reach through and slide the bolt open. The door swung inward and stepped inside, a menacing silhouette cast by the bright lighthouse beam. "Chloe, don't fight this," he whispered, his voice dripping with unhinged conviction. "It's the noble thing to do. Våtmannen needs a final sacrifice, and you're all that's left. Give up, and I'll make it quick, please." He muttered apologetically to her as he approached her. Chloe backed away, her eyes darting around frantically. She spotted the can of whale oil and the book of matches, and an idea, desperate and terrible, formed in her mind. Grant lunged. Chloe rammed her shoulder into him, grabbed the oil canister, and splashed its remaining contents all over him. The slick, greasy liquid soaked his clothes. She scrambled past him, out of the small lantern enclosure, fumbling with the matchbook. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely strike one. Grant roared in pain as the fuel got into his eyes. He charged at where he last saw her, and just as he reached for her, a match flared to life. She thrust it forward into his chest. The effect was instantaneous. Grant erupted in a column of fire, a human torch, his screams of agony piercing. He stumbled backward, flailing, and collapsed into the lantern room, his burning body feeding the ancient lamp. The beacon, already bright, flared with a blinding white light that punched a hole through the storm clouds, momentarily illuminating the distant, sleeping town of Kråkvik. Chloe slammed the busted door shut and watched in horror as Dr. Grant burned alive, his screams slowly dying as the flames consumed him. But as she stared at the brilliant sweeping beam of light, a new sound reached her ears, weaving itself into the crackle of the flames. She turned, levitating in the very center of the beam. Seemingly having risen from the ocean was Våtmannen. He raised the golden fiddle to his chin and began to play. The melody was inside her head, a beautiful, irresistible command. Her earplugs were long gone, she realized, lost in the struggle. Her terror melted away, replaced by a profound, blissful calm. The song was a promise of peace, of an end to the pain and the fear. It was a lullaby for a broken world. In a trance, her movements fluid and graceful, Chloe turned from the fire and began to walk. She descended the stairs, walked past the bloody mess where Jess murdered, and out into the storm. She walked in a dreamlike state past the edge of the rocks and straight into the waves, the cold water a welcoming embrace, until it closed over her head, silencing the world forever. Beneath the lighthouse, in his lair, Våtmannen feasts on Chloe's lifeless body, taking chunks of her stomach and thighs in single bites. Julian closed the laptop he had been monitoring the live stream from, satisfied with another successful event. He truly was a master entertainer. He checked his watch and sighed. Still 4 hours to go until he arrives in Italy, and then another 4 hours to the villa. He hated traveling, but it was a necessary evil when you ran an international entertainment empire, and he was a very hands-on style CEO. Julian considered his options and decided to sleep the remainder of the journey. In his experience, surprise contestants like this next one tended to take a lot out of him. He checked his phone one last time and opened YouTube, launching a playlist by his favorite creator, Autistic Spidey. He reclined in the chair and closed his eyes, his mind racing with possible themes for his next game.